Hi guys, what's up everybody? This is Simon Marshall saying Happy New Year everybody to the WWE universe. As many of you know this morning, in reality, it's sad and it's heartbroken this morning that one of my all-time favorite great wrestling announcers who used to be behind the stage or in the he was a commentator for the world's famous building in wrestling history, and that's Madison Square Gardens. And his name was Mean Gene Okerlund. He passed away at 76 this morning. He was survived by his wife Kitty, I think her name was. He was always mentioning her, and she was a real nice lady. And poor guy, I watched him as a little boy because I remember from. I heard he did great in AWA. He would always interview people like Ray the Cat Stevens, his best friend in the world, Nick Bockwinkel, to Vern Gagne. He even had Maurice Mad Dog Vachon. He even had, who else was from that great organization down south? They were just big names that came from that territory, which was based in Minnesota. But they had a show like there every day in the 70s, which was cool because AWA was Minnesota and I think maybe Missouri and Wisconsin. Oh, Chicago. That's where Mean Gene Okerlund was from. Chicago, Illinois. And he was a great man. I always admire his interviews because I found out who he used to interview. Greats like Larry the Axe Henning, Vern Gagne, Nick Bockwinkel, Maurice Mad Dog Vachon, oh, Hollywood Hulk Hogan, even Andre the Giant, because he tried Andre the Giant's, what's that thing called? His jacket, which was pretty neat. He said in reality, it was twice as huge. We're talking maybe two extra larges together, make it four extra larges. And poor Gino, he couldn't fit his hand in that sleeve. And I'm like, wow, that was crazy. Hi guys, how you doing? Happy New Year. Yeah, you heard about the news. Yeah, me too. Yeah, I found out from my Canadian sister station called Rogers Sportsnet Canada, and that's who as you know, down south, NBC Sports Network are from the same division because here in Canada, the Rogers owns the rights to WWE Network. That's where we get our network. And unfortunately, I don't have the WWE Network right now because where I'm at is out of town and I can't get the network on my own. So that's what's going on. And, you know, for me, I followed Mean Gene Okerlund as a little kid because I'll tell you who became his best friend in the world. Mr. Howard Finkel, the ring announcer who used to say, "Ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome WWE Hall of Famer Mean Gene Okerlund." That's my favorite moment about the great Howard Finkel. And I know a big time Hall of Famer who's really, really devastated about his loss. Make it two. They're two Hall of Famers that are really, really saddened about his loss. And that is Hollywood Hulk Hogan and the Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart. Because I saw Mean Gene Okerlund on Stone Cold Steve Austin's podcast. Because Austin had a lot of love and respect for Gino. And, you know, we had two Genos in the WWF as when I was a little kid because Gene Okerlund, he used to work for he was still with AWA, which was ESPN. That's the American Sports Network, because our sister station actually is TSN, the Sports Network here in Canada. And they're the same company, they're brother station to ESPN because ESPN belongs to the south, TSN belongs up north. So that's how we see it, and that's how I got to know and saw the late great Mean Gene Okerlund, and he was on programs like the WWE Superstars of Wrestling, Wrestling Challenge, because he did the main cards like for WrestleMania 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Because after he left the AWA, he joined the forces with Hulk Hogan, the Junkyard Dog, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, Bobby the Brain Heenan, the Weasel, Jesse the Body Ventura, all jumped ship from AWA, the American Wrestling Association, from Minnesota to New York City at Madison Square Gardens, which was known as the WWF. So that's where I got to watch Mean Gene Okerlund, and he did a lot of great interviews with such Hall of Famers like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Hollywood Hulk Hogan, Bobby the Brain Heenan, the late great Andre the Giant, the late great Big John Studd, the Ugandan giant Kamala, Steve Lombardi, who was Kimchi or the Brooklyn Brawler. He had, who was other people? Oh, Jesse the Body Ventura. He even interviewed Jack Tunney, who used to be the old WWF president, and he would always get welcomed by his best friend in the world. Those two were like brothers. The legendary great Hall of Famer Howard Finkel. To me, he will always be Madison Square Gardens because he had a very deep voice in the old days. Like, cause he would say when there were some main events at MSG, you know, the following contest is scheduled for one fall, and the time limit, and it will be a 1 hour time limit. Introducing first the challenger from Moscow, Russia, weighing 325 pounds, the Russian bear, Ivan Koloff. You know, he didn't use it yet, and then it's like, and his opponent from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, weighing 245 pounds. He is the World Heavyweight Championship of the World, Bruno Sam Martino. And that's how he had that. And then WrestleMania 2, he had that high pitched voice. And believe it or not, WrestleMania 1, Mean Gene Okerlund interviewed the Junkyard Dog, Greg Valentine, my all-time favorite Hall of Famer, the Hot Rod, Rowdy Roddy Piper, and then there was Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. He was always suspicious about the cast on Bob Orton Jr.'s arm, and it's like, well, wait a minute, I thought that arm was feeling better, or and my favorite for him would be like, oh, will you knock it off? And the late, great Lord Alfred Hayes accidentally called him Jim. It is not Jim. It is not James. His real name was Eugene. Eugene Okerlund from Chicago, Illinois. Because I always admired Gino. On the best program he worked on NBC in the US was called Saturday Night's Main Event, which SNL took the night off because people used to call it WWF SNME, which was Saturday Night Main Event, and that was the best program in the world from 1985 until 1992, because he was there, because Gino had the great interview. You know who he interviewed? Mostly the baby faces. Guess who had the heels? Jesse the Body Ventura. He would always say, well, we'll see about that, Mean Gene. Let's see what you could say. All right. Well, you don't intimidate me there, Jesse the Body Ventura. Well, let's see. What are we going to say about this one there, Hulk Hogan? Well, let me tell you something, Mean Gene. That's my favorite quote about Mean Gene. Or it's like, well, let me tell you something, Mean Gene. Those guys don't intimidate me at all, Gino. So He was there. He also did the Survivor Series from 1987 till 1992, because as many of you know, I'll get you up there and tell you what happened. So 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92. So make that 7 WWF Survivor Series on his resume, because he's got 9 WrestleManias on his resume. So let's get to the Royal Rumble. 88, 89, 90, 91, 92. 6 Royal Rumbles in the WWF. He had those, and then he had 6 SummerSlams. That was his last pay-per-view in WWF history, was the 1993 SummerSlam, because this weasel, I did not like him as a teenager, named Todd Pettengill. He was not that great. I'm telling you, Todd Pettengill was not my cup of coffee in the WWF history, he wasn't that great, because in reality, there was a budget cut because Hulk Hogan left, because he was WWF in 1984 till 1993, and it was tough times because there was the steroid scandal, and that's why Hulk Hogan, the Macho Man Randy Savage, the Ultimate Warrior, the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith, Bret the Hitman Hart, the Mouth of South Jimmy Hart, Bobby the Brain Heenan, Tony Schiavone, everybody all jumped ship from the WWF down to the WCW for a greener path. And that's what I remember about Mean Gene, because after spending 9 years with the WWF, it was heartbroken to watch him go down to the WCW. And there was a good clip from Saturday Night, which was TBS, then Turner Broadcasting Corporation, and or no, Turner Broadcasting Station. There we go. And Jesse and Tony were just anxious about that early Christmas gift. Like, are you ready for that surprise? It's like, oh, I'm ready. Tell me, do you have a Christmas gift for me? As a matter of fact, we do. Jesse, we know this guy really, really long time, and he's finally here down south, and he's well respected in the wide wrestling world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the WCW, Mean Gene Okerlund. What? I don't believe it. Where is he? I gotta see this. And you know what he started calling him? He called him the socialized climber, or maybe I think in reality it was called organization climber, because WCW did had more moolah than WWF, because guys like Mean Gene Okerlund went down in November of 1993, and then on December 5th of 1993 on TSN of Monday Night Raw of the WWF, Bobby the Brain Heenan, he was exiting at that night on this quote by Mr. Vince McMahon Jr. It was like, all right, we'll take you from there. Well, let's take you from there, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be the Macho Man Randy Savage going one-on-one against Fatu, aka Rikishi, on Monday Night Raw. And then there's Bobby say, hey, the H is here. And then from there, that's when Gorilla Monsoon got promoted to I'm not sure what his role was as a WWF, because, told Bobby the Brain Heenan, I got good news and bad news. The good news was he won a free vacation. It's like, what's the catch? Well, what you said to me backstage, you truly offended me. So he grabs him. Vince McMahon's like, oh no, what's gonna happen with Bobby the Brain Heenan? Oh, here he goes now. And then he was begging him, like, please don't send me away. Get up on your feet. And, he says, I've known you for many years. For 9 years, you really offended me. And it was during Christmas time, and it was a good way to send off Bobby the Brain Heenan. And I always wondered, Mean Gene did watch that episode of Raw from Florida, and he was like, oh boy, is he really coming down south? And I believe he was. So that's what happened with Bobby the Brain Heenan, and he was sent off right in the backstage of the Manhattan building in New York City. It was farewell to Bobby the Brain Heenan. And I was like, well, goodbye to my childhood years. I was 15 years old when the WWE let go of everybody, Hulk Hogan, Tito Santana, the Macho Man, Randy Savage, oh yeah, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. That's the guy who has a lot of love and respect for Mean Gene Okerlund, because the Dragon was the greatest wrestler in the world. So was Tito Santana. And I was reading on Twitter this morning from a lot of good peers. Randy Orton, John Cena, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock. The Rock admired Mean Gene Okerlund because he always did interviews with The Rock's good old pops, soul man, Rocky Johnson, and his grandfather, High Chief Peter Maivia. Aloha. And that's what I miss about Mean Gene Okerlund. And he had interviews with Mr. Fuji, and he was good friends with the great Pat Patterson, Jerry Briscoe, Tony Gurria. Everybody just had a lot of love and respect for Gino, and that's what I miss about me and Gene Okerlund, because he was my childhood years, and he used to be on MTV down south, which was called the Rock and Roll Wrestling Connection, with Hulk Hogan, who used to be the WWF Heavyweight Championship of the world for 4.5 years. That's an impressive record, because I found out why in reality he dropped that World Heavyweight Championship to the greatest Hall of Famer of all time. He was the eighth wonder of the world, Andre the Giant. God bless the Giant. I know now. Hot Rod, Roddy Piper, the Macho Man, Randy Savage, Nikolai Volkov, to Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, Larry the Axe Hennig, Nick Bockwinkel, Vern Gagne, Mean Gene Okerlund. They're all reuniting with the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and Gene Okerlund. I remember two of my favorite moments in WCW history was, number one, when you were at the Clash of Champions in New Orleans, Louisiana. You were so shocked to hear Bobby the Brain Heenan, the Weasel, was coming to WCW, and you're like, okay, hold on. This is an earpiece he had on. It's like, no, you gotta be kidding me. What? I don't believe this. Ladies and gentlemen, this guy won't leave me alone. He follows me everywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, Bobby the Brain Heenan. And that was the greatest moment in WCW history. And he quotes, Heenan, will you leave me alone? What in the world are you doing down south? I work here, says who? Oh, try Jane and Ted, the Turners. I might be your president and your boss one of these days. Oh, you are crazy. You are not my boss, and you mean nothing to me. So that's what I remember about Mean Gene Okerlund at WCW. And then, believe it or not, he was the man behind getting the legendary Hollywood Hulk Hogan, who spent a whole year out of wrestling, because Hulk Hogan's last WWF pay-per-view was the King of the Ring against the late great Yokozuna for the WWF Heavyweight Championship of the World, who he dropped the belt to. And then after a while, because Gino has connection, he was the one who told Ted Turner and Eric Bischoff to say, I can get Hulk Hogan on the phone. And that's what happened. It was around May he signed the big contract with WCW and Ted Turner for I don't know how much. And he was talking turkey. We're talking prime rib with Hulk Hogan and WCW, because Ted Turner was the multi-billionaire who knew how to spend ridiculous amount of money, which was crazy, because they took Hacksaw Jim Duggan, another one of my favorite WWF Hall of Famers, now WWE Hall of Famers. And then Eddie Leslie, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, another one of my favorites. Greg the Hammer Valentine, another Hall of Famer. So that's what happened. And unfortunately, it was pretty wild. And I can't believe the WCW faithful just booed Hulk Hogan because he did come from working in the New York area, because Hulk Hogan is from Tampa, Florida, because that's where his character was based on. But he was from Venice Beach, California, and I think he did grow up in Tampa, Florida, and that's where he met the Briscoe brothers, Jack and Jerry. So, 2 years later, at Bash at the Beach, Mean Gene Okerlund witnessed the most craziest and scariest factions in wrestling history. It almost killed the WWF in 1996. I was 18 years old in the summer of 1996 at Bash at the Beach. Like, I watched it from home, and it was Tony Schiavone, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and Bobby the Brain Heenan tried to figure out who the third man was, who was going to join the new World Order of Wrestling, who we knew as NWO, because it was the narcissist Lex Luger, the Macho Man Randy Savage, and the icon Sting, who took on the outsiders, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, because Hall and Nash invaded the WCW, and then when Hulk Hogan showed up, I thought he was gonna help WCW, but no, he wanted to be a bad guy, and that's why he was the third man. And Mean Gene Okerlund gave it the greatest interview in wrestling history and said, Hulk Hogan, Hulk Hogan, excuse me, excuse me. What in the world were you thinking when you came out here? And then Hogan said, well, Mean Gene, the first things first, you need to tell all these people, which was Orlando, Florida, to tell all of us to shut up and quiet, as he explained himself why. And he said, I've been with you for many years. And it's true, he's been with Hulk Hogan since the early 80s. Like, he was with AWA, WWE, and WCW because they're good friends. They were like brothers. And he said, well, I'll say this to you, Gino. This right here was the future of wrestling. You can call this the new world order of wrestling, brother. And, Hall and Nash came from up north. That's because they had to use, these guys came from a great big organization up north. And who's the third man? Well, who knew about the organization up north? And Gino said, I've been there, I've done that. And you're not allowed to use WWF back then. That's why they called it the big organization up north. So, and guess what happened? He had a piece of garbage on him because the fans were being crazy, rambunctious, throwing a lot of trash in Orlando, Florida at Bash at the Beach, because Hulk Hogan did betray wrestling and WCW for the New World Order for life. And poor Mean Gene still had that scar. He talked about it when he was with WWE, and I was heartbroken when that fan gave Gino the permanent scar for, the NWO, because Hulk Hogan quoted, I held my head up for 2 years, and, all of this garbage, all of this crap represents these fans. If it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, the Hulk Hogan really got twice as bigger than the organization up north. And poor Mean Gene, he did cry when Hulk Hogan had to, be the third guy and become NWO. But luckily, in reality, because when they went off the air, off pay-per-view, behind stage, Hulk Hogan gave Mean Gene Okerlund a big hug. And I really thank you, Hulk Hogan, for hugging Gino, because Mean Gene was a lot of love and respect. That's why I admire the guy, because he was the brains behind all those legends. And, and now there will never be another Mean Gene Okerlund, because he was always funny. And that's what I'll miss about Mean Gene Okerlund. And, and after that, and there were some ups and downs with WCW for because 1998 they officially lost their battle with Monday Night Raw because Monday Night Raw got a little bit edgier with the Attitude Era. So Mean Gene Okerlund, poor guy, didn't know what to do because he did good interviews with my all-time favorite superstar, Bret the Hitman Hart. You know, I got so much respect for you, Gino, and he was always good on the microphone. And Tony Schiavone was pretty heartbroken about Mean Gene's loss, and he always respected Mean Gene because I think a lot of good guys and a lot of the women really looked up to Mean Gene Okerlund. People like Renee Yan, uh, Charlie Caruso of the WWE. Oh, Jeremy Borash really looked up to Mean Gene Okerlund, and Todd Pettengill and Eric Bischoff because Eric Bischoff was the in that same spot for WCW from 1990 till 96 because he decided to become like the kind of like a manager for NWO, the New World Order, and and he became edgier, and for me, I admire Mean Gene because when WCW got folded, he was at the last taping episode. It was heartbroken for him and pretty much everybody backstage. And Brother Love, Bruce Pritchard, had a lot of love for Mean Gene Okerlund. And my favorite moment, the happiest day of my life as a Mean Gene Okerlund fan, he came back home to the WWF, which is now WWE. And where did he return it? WrestleMania X7, who we know as X17. And he teamed up with his buddy, Bobby the Brain Heenan. And they did that Legends Battle Royal. And that Legends Battle Royal had Luke and Butch, the Bushwhackers, Duke the Dumpsters Drazy, the Iron Sheik, Earthquake, Doink the Clown, the Goon, the Ugandan Giant Kamala, Kemchi, Repo Man, that was Barry Darsow for the record. And it had Jimmy Cornette. Another man was heartbroken about Mean Gene Okerlund's loss. So was Harvey Whippleman because there was a little feud in '92 between Mean Gene Okerlund and Harvey Whippleman, and Gino was the smartest, wittiest guy ever. Like he would say, "Well, look who's talking, little short guy. Don't you get me started there." I was like, "Oh, hush up, Gino." And he had that raspberry voice, Harvey Whippleman, like, "Oh, knock it off there, Gino." So, from there was some, Michael P.S. Freebird Hayes, who entered the Battle Royal along with the One Man Gang, Tugboat, Hillbilly Jim, Brother Love, and finally Sergeant Slaughter. Because Gene Okerlund put a bet on Hillbilly Jim to win the Legends Battle Royal at WrestleMania 17, and it was a pretty short match, but it was pretty entertaining to see all those childhood, superstars that I grew up watching as a little kid, and he was awesome. And he said, and guess what? Bobby the Brain Heenan Weasel accidentally called Gino Tony because of they just got bought by the WWF, who bought WCW. So that was the best moment ever. And I will always remember and treasure Mean Gene Okerlund. And, thank you, TSN, Roger Sportsnet, for honoring Gene Okerlund. And he won't be forgotten. And he went to another organization down south called the XWF, which used to be XWE, another organization by Jimmy Hart. And he had Jerry the King Lawler, Tony Schiavone, and Mike Tenay. Hulk Hogan took on the late great Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, and Gene Okerlund did a great interview, like saying, "Hulk Hogan, how does it feel to be back here in the ring?" And I was like, "Well, let me tell you something, Mean Gene. It feels so good and so great to be back here All right. You know, you are still active and athletic after a great performance. And what are your goals and what are your wishes? And his wishes was to be the XWE Heavyweight Championship of the world. So after they folded, because the King went back home to the WWE after a 9 month separation from his wife, and then Gene came back when Hulk Hogan came to the WWE back in 2002 at No Way Out. He was part of the NWO, and Mean Gene had an interview with the People's Champ and the People's Iconic Hulk Hogan versus The Rock. That was the greatest match in wrestling history with WrestleMania 18. JR and the King called that match really awesome. So when the brands started splitting, I think Mean Gene Okerlund went to SmackDown because Hulk Hogan went to SmackDown, and it was a great thing for him to come back. And during that year, he used to host one of my all-time favorite programs in the WWE history, and it was called WWE Confidential, which I miss the most, and I wish the WWE network can bring that show back to life because it was great, and it was interesting stories about ECW, AWA, NWA, and WCW and WWE. You know, like because he was really, really, really heartbroken about the passings of the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, to Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, um, Road Warrior, Hawk, oh, Classy, Freddie Blassie, all those guys. It was heartbroken to watch my childhood die, and I'm like, oh man. So he was always great. He was behind the brains of Confidential, and then he also hosted one of my favorite programs from MSG Network called The Best of Madison Square Gardens for WWE, because there were always great matches from live events and the original 4 pay-per-views like Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series. And then he also did another program called WWE Vintage Collection, and I am gonna miss you, Mean Gene. I know you're up there with Nick Bockwinkel, Bobby the Brain Heenan, Vern Gagne, some of the AWA legends who passed on, and you will never be forgotten as long as I live. I want to say to you, Mean Gene Okerlund, thank you very much for what you did in the world of wrestling, whether if it's AWA, WWE, WCW, and you will never be forgotten because so many legends and Hall of Famer just loved you and had a lot of love and respect for the Mean Gene or Gino. So, rest in peace, Gino. As an old say goes, I'm Simon Marshall saying thank you for watching, everybody.